Atlanta News First Plus starts now.
Thank you for joining us here at the First Alert Desk on Atlanta News First Plus. I'm Maria Moreau as we continue to bring you coverage of a trial watched around the nation. Colin Gray, after 2 weeks of evidence, emotional testimony, and a heavy burden on this jury, they ruled that he was guilty of all 29 felony counts against him. We are still waiting to hear when sentencing will be for the father of accused Appalachia High School shooter Colt Gray. But in the meantime, we want to review really all of what we saw over the past 2 weeks. And to help me with that, I want to bring in Suri Chara Jimenez, a criminal defense attorney who does not have a connection to this case, but we wanted to bring him on as a legal expert to weigh in from that world. Suri, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Now, obviously, we were on verdict watch here. We've been following this trial on ANF Plus, gavel to gavel. I just want to start by getting your reaction. I mean, guilty on all charges across the board.
Well, these type of cases are very difficult to defend, even when there's a legitimate defense. Even when there's a new theory of the case for the prosecution, it is still heavily, weighed in favor of the prosecution. Why? Because it is so emotional. I cannot imagine the pressure of a juror that would have to be the one that said not guilty when so many children died in such a tragic way. It is that alone makes this a very difficult case to defend. And then, in addition to that, it seems like the prosecution did a very good job in preparing for that cross. I mean, it started just from going all the way back to first grade and showing that, sadly, the defendant just was not very aware of all the issues. And at one point or another, people start expecting a father to know what's going on. And especially if you're going to buy somebody a weapon, you should be very aware of who you're buying a weapon for. Nonetheless, still, even with that said, I expect this to go all the way up to the Supreme Court. There's going to be appeals over and appeals. There's a lot of issues that need to be resolved, and a lot of issues to do with the trial and just with the charges, the way that it was charged. So I expect this case to be tied up with the courts for months, if not years.
And I'm curious, watching something like this, we don't typically see the order of events where you have the trial and conviction of a father before we even see his son, who was accused of these crimes, see his day in court. And I know in the American judicial system, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. So how were prosecutors then able to carry on with the arguments that Colin Gray could have stopped his son, could have predicted that a school shooting was imminent, when technically on a judicial level, Colt Gray hasn't even been found guilty of those crimes?
Well, in this case, what they had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt is what the father did or didn't do, and whether or not that fits in the scheme of their theory of being cruelty in the first and all the other charges they chose to bring forward in a new theory that they came up with. Whether or not his son is guilty of the charges was not something for this jury to determine. So they can go forward just by showing that a tragedy happened, and this tragedy could have been prevented if the defendant had done something. That's pretty much what they were able to convince the jury and prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, what this happens all the time, especially when there's cases with co-defendants. Many times, something I'll give you an example of is drug cases, when there's a lot of co-defendants, and then you have the kingpin on top, the actual person that is moving all the weight, that is making all the money, that probably takes the least risk. And the way the prosecutors do, they start at the bottom. They start going for the mules, the people that hold it, the lookouts, the drivers. They get them convicted, and ultimately they use that to pressure either a plea or even a harsher sentence on the person on top, on the principal. Why? Because they're able to say, look, we've already convicted everyone else and we had less evidence on them. We're definitely going to have a strong case against you. Now, with regards to his son, what we expect, what people have been saying is that it's going to end up being a non-negotiated plea. is going to end up being an admission of guilt to the charges and then leaving it up to the judge to sentence. Obviously, something that's going to be, they'll be hoping that it's going to be a sentence different than what the state is asking. But this win is going to be able to be used against his son as well, because they're going to be able to show, if you want to risk going to trial, we have even more evidence against you. It'd be in your best interest to take a deal.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to follow what happens in Colt Gray's case. And whether we will even see trial. You bring up a good point. I wanted to highlight the defense's strategy of bringing Colin Gray to testify in his own trial. Not something that we see happen all the time, but the defense had a much shorter period of arguments than the prosecution did in the span of these 2 weeks. Why do you think that decision was made?
Well, the decision of whether or not for the defendant to take the stand is always a very challenging decision, and it's ultimately the defendant's choice. Even many times we don't want our clients to say anything, and our argument is going to be that the evidence that was presented did not meet the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes it's a difficult choice because you and I and the jurors and everybody wants to know, well, I want to know his side of the story. But we need to remember that, again, a defendant in this country has no burden. They don't have to prove anything. However, in this case, it looks like the defendant chose to take the stand and likely prepared for it. But it was still not enough. A lot of times the defendant, they feel like they have to take the stand because they want to tell their side of the story. They want to clarify anything that the cops might be saying that was inconsistent. That's just not the way it happened. But it's still always dangerous, especially when you have a prosecutor that is so prepared to get you at every point. A prosecutor's dream is always going to be able to cross-examine a defendant. Why? Because they have so much information on them. Every little misstep, every little thing that they said at an interview that doesn't add up, inconsistencies, they're going to impeach them and destroy them on the stand, because that's what prosecutors do. They're trained to destroy witnesses. And in this case, they were pretty effective at doing it.
And, we saw testimony from the victim of that school shooting. We even saw family members, Marcy Gray, the estranged wife of Colin Gray, come on and testify for several hours. We saw text messages within the Gray family as they were talking to each other, and even Colt Gray's communication to Colin Gray saying, and I believe I'm paraphrasing here, but quote, both there's blood on your hands, and then later, the day of the shooting, saying this isn't your fault. That those text messages Colt Gray sends to Colin Gray. I'm curious what the purpose of presenting that to a jury when you are centering a trial around parental criminal negligence and not necessarily the school shooting itself, what that did for the prosecution in trying to bring the jury to their side.
Well, in essence, they were able even to get his daughter to testify against him. And that is powerful and sad. One of the things that they were able to show is that even though the defense was that there's no way he could have seen this coming, all of these little text messages, everything adds up. At one point, yeah, maybe we don't know what our children are doing. They get in trouble, they mischievous, sometimes they lie to us, like in this case where there's evidence that they lied about where the money was going to go, that money that Dad had given him was spent in a different way. But at the same time, you have this text message and this text message and this text message, and all of these little pieces of evidence add up. In law school, the way they taught us this is, a brick is not a wall, but you build a wall brick by brick by brick with all these little pieces of evidence that eventually the jury in this case end up saying, maybe you didn't know at first, but after all of these instances, you should have known and you should have acted upon it.
For the precedent that this could set. I mean, we're talking about in Michigan, the parents of convicted shooter Ethan Crumbley, both convicted for their involvement, and now we're seeing Colin Gray convicted in Colt Gray's alleged involvement. What kind of precedent can we see around the nation, and is this going to create some sort of protocol of if your child commits a crime, you are going to be investigated and possibly feel the wrath of the fullest extent of the law?
Well, that's That's scary. That's very scary. And I think, yeah, prosecutors are going to feel emboldened to start charging people for the actions, the bad acts, the crimes committed by other people. Uh, what would be interesting to see if prosecutors are emboldened enough to go after the gun manufacturers, go after these stores that would just sell to pretty much anybody, and go after the gun shows. But no, I highly doubt they're going to do that. They're going to go after the parents. And this is terrible because, I mean, Mr. Colin also lost his son. This is tragic all around. It is terrible for the families that were hurt during the shooting, but also, you know, the Gray family is going through a lot. So it is scary that they can go after the parents. Now, what should happen is that the government should start being a little more involved when DFACS is called, when cops are called, when guns are involved with minors. They should have acted. So it will be interesting if they're also going to go against the law enforcement that knew about this and did nothing, the administrators at the school that knew about this and didn't do enough. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. They're going to protect their own, and they're going to go against the parents, and it's going to be a scary situation.
We're talking with criminal defense attorney Suri Chara Jimenez. Thank you so much for joining us here as really everyone reacts to the verdict that came down this morning, and we continue to wait for the sentencing that is still to be had for Colin Gray. Suri, I thank you, as always, for joining us on ANF Plus. I want to take folks to some of the commentary from the district attorney, who was a top prosecutor of this case as well, and how he looks forward to the sentencing. You know, there were mention of the family needing to communicate with the prosecutors here ahead of any dates and times being set, and we're still waiting to hear really when that will be announced. But right now, Colin Gray faces up to 180 years in prison for the 29 counts that he was found guilty of. And again, for these prosecutors, the work continues as they discuss with the judge, as they discuss with family members, and we are going to be watching closely and bringing that to you on ANF Plus. But I want to take you out now to remarks from Brad Smith in the immediate aftermath of that verdict. Take a listen.
Really blamed others in this case, said D. Martin could have been to blame, said Lisa Butler. What do you say, or the mother should have known something? How do you explain that to viewers who haven't been watching this 2-week trial?
One of the things that came to light during our investigation was that the reason so many lives were saved at Appalachia was because of lessons we learned from prior tragedies. So I am all for looking at these things. What could we have done better? What can we do in the future to make our children safer? But the blame game, these were good people trying to make their best decisions as they could with limited information. The one person that had all the information was the one that didn't act.
Did you ever actually consider charges for Marcy Gray?
Absolutely. We found what she did to be morally reprehensible. We do not believe she's a good mother, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, she did not have custody of Colt. She did not have proximity to Colt. And she was not the one that provided him the firearms.
Can you provide any update on Colt's case and where that stands at this point?
I cannot. The state stands ready to try the case at any time.
What does this verdict mean for the community here in the county?
I hope it starts the healing process. It can't, of course, complete it until we finish the whole trial, both trials. But I hope that they can start moving forward with their healing.
Were you surprised at how quick the verdict came?
If they didn't come back in 5 minutes, I start sweating. So to me, it seemed like an eternity.
What message do you hope this case sends to other parents here in Barrow County or around the country?
Well, at my college, there was a plaque on the wall that said, "Duty is the sublimest word in the English language." And we talk a lot about rights in our country. We're proud of our rights, and I'm proud of our rights. But, you know, our rights were given to us by our forefathers. But God gave us a duty to protect our children. And I hope that we remember that as parents, as community members, to protect our children, because that is our God-given duty.
Legal question. Colt has the presumption of innocence.
Yes, sir.
Well, how can he still have that when his father's been convicted now of crimes that he allegedly committed?
That's a question for the courts and his defense attorneys.
Can you give our audience a sense of how much work you and your team put into a case like this?
Hours, lives. We've had Ashley Gilliland, who testified in the trial, Amanda Dibble, Jenny, thank you, worked extremely hard on this case. It is all they've been doing for the last year, at least. The hours we put in has been tremendous. But we wanted to honor the families, the victims. We wanted to honor all the hard work that law enforcement did, and us not giving everything we had to this case would have been dishonor to them, and we weren't going to do that.
And clearly it had an emotional impact on your entire team as well as you. There were moments that we saw you, tearing up as we heard testimony from those survivors.
Well, we're all parents. We can never understand the full grief, but it touches us. And we've met these families, we've dealt with these families, we walked through with these families, and yeah, it's emotional.
There were points throughout leading up to the tragedy when law enforcement could have stepped in to interrupt the situation in some way, or have spoken up a little bit louder than they did. Do you think there are some lessons that can be learned from that for law enforcement in the county as far as how to prevent these kind of situations from happening again?
Yeah, we've been discussing that as a law enforcement community. In fact, y'all probably know that after this event happened, we got a flood of threats coming in from kids all over the world, because kids are kids, I guess. So we've had to discuss, how are we going to deal with these? How are we going to work through all of these threats where children are doing this what we would consider outrageous actions of calling in threats when they don't mean anything. So, yeah, there's been a lot of discussions with law enforcement about how to deal with these sorts of things going forward.
What would you say to those that are disturbed by this verdict across the nation, who think this is a parent that is being held responsible for something that his child did? What would you tell those people?
I would say, please watch my opening. This was a trial about this defendant's actions, his choices, and his responsibility.
And that was Brad Smith, the district attorney for Barrow County. Again, as we continue to review the moments that shaped the trial of Colin Gray, I want to take you back to the actual verdict, because that was a powerful moment when the courtroom stood still and you could hear a pin drop. And then the jurors walk in and, of course, deliver what would ultimately be a sealment of the fate of Colin Gray. Take a look.
In the Superior Court of Barrow County, State of Georgia versus Colin Gray, case number 24-CR-593-P, jury verdict. Count 1, murder in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 2, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 3, murder in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 4, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 5, involuntary manslaughter, unfaithful act. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 6, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 7, involuntary manslaughter, unlawful act. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 8, reckless conduct. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 10, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 11, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 12, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 13, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 14, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 15, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 16, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 17, cruelty to children in the second degree. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 18, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 19, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 20, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 22, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 23, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 24, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 25, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 26, cruelty to children in the second degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 27, reckless conduct, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 28, reckless conduct, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Count 29, reckless conduct, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. This third day of March 2026, signed for person.
And there you have it, that verdict, and you can just see on Colin Gray's face just very focused, not a whole lot of emotional expression from this father. And again, really the bulk of the emotions is what we saw from Colin Gray in his own testimony. And you can see some of that as he tried to create the perspective or share his perspective of those 3 years that prosecutors were saying that he had all the warning signs, that he had the FBI reaching out to him over his son's alleged use of school threats on the internet, that he has had family members express concern, and even talking with the jury about how he bonded with his son over firearms. I mean, there was extensive testimony that we heard from the defense of asking Colin Gray about Colt Gray, asking Colin Gray about the relationship and the environment in the home. And you can see the sorrow on this father's face, and in his own words, some of the regret that he expressed in not helping his son before this tragic shooting. Again, Colt Gray, this is some of the video that was shown to a jury, along with testimony from some of the victims, the injured victims, some of fellow classmates, and even family members themselves, as we saw unfold over the course of these 2 weeks, going on to week 3, which was the verdict that came down ultimately, finding Colin Gray guilty on all charges. Now, we spoke to an attorney on the greater conversation around this, about parental responsibility in their child's crimes, about how this could shape Colt Gray's potential trial, and as we heard earlier, whether a plea deal was still on the table. So we're going to speak with a criminal defense attorney, Michael Barber, now, as he weighed in on really how this trial unfolded and what it could mean in shaping Georgia law, and how prosecutors address school shooting crimes and crimes that involve parental negligence and parental responsibility in the future. And we are joined by Michael Barber, a criminal defense attorney with Michael Barber and Associates. Thank you so much for coming on here. Really weighing in from a legal background, kind of what we saw over the span of these 2 weeks. I just want to start by getting your overall reaction. I mean, we're talking about 29 felony counts and convicted on all charges.
Yeah, I think that this case is very important because the prosecution is basically saying that no longer are you allowed to say, well, I didn't know, and use that as an excuse, when there should have been clear and epic signs that there were issues going on, not only in your household, but in general everywhere. So I think this case is very important.
And for so many people that watched closely, the Michigan case involving the parents of Ethan Crumbley, also a convicted mass shooter, Colt Gray, just for clarification to our viewers, has not seen his day in trial. We continue to communicate about the Appalachia High School mass shooting. Colt Gray has not been convicted, therefore he is innocent until proven guilty. But in the Crumbley case, we saw both parents being convicted for their negligence, for not being more proactive and preventing such a tragedy. With Colin Gray, we're seeing also a jury rule that he had it within his power to do something about this, and he didn't. So I am curious how significant this case is to establishing a precedent for parental criminal liability.
Well, honestly, the precedent's going to be huge because courts and prosecutors, like I was just saying, they are leaning more towards that there is no excuse anymore. You can't claim all of these issues and then say, okay, well, I'm not going to be held responsible for this because it's not my fault that my son went and did this. Well, it is, because you have a responsibility, especially if you're buying them a weapon, to make sure that they understand gun safety, that they understand the danger it causes to the public and things of that nature. From a prosecutorial side, that's exactly what they're trying to do. And from a defense side, you're more leaning towards, yes, that's true, and here's what we did to prevent it.
Yeah, certainly. I'm curious your perspective, some of the red flags that came up in trial, the 2023 FBI visit regarding online shooting threats, Colt's text messages about teachers, and even the shrine to a school shooter that was created and posted in Colt Gray's bedroom. From a legal standpoint, what is the difference here with Colin Gray having general concerns about his son's mental health and then having specific actionable knowledge that a school shooting like this could have been imminent?
Well, red flags are important clues that in the legal community we use to say that you have to know something's going on here. I mean, a shrine to a convicted killer is going to be a huge clue that, you know, a father should say, why do you have this shrine to somebody that was part of a mass shooting in your bedroom? And although we don't have a necessary statute per se that handles criminal negligence, but if the prosecution can establish a conscience disregard or a disregard that is of such great magnitude that it causes an issue, that's going to be a huge outcome.
From a legal standpoint, I mean, if there's a parent out there watching this, watching trial and now this conviction, and they have a child that similarly causes them to worry, what can they do proactively, I guess, to avoid finding themselves being accused of criminal negligence?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. So what you have to try and determine is how much knowledge do we actually have of what's going on. So is your child having the same issues at school and things of that nature? Now, no one can tell anybody how to parent their own child, but taking the necessary steps, the difference is going to be between, did you lock the guns up? Did you give them safety classes? Did you tell them, you know, guns are dangerous weapons. You can't just go out and flail it around and things of that nature. Without any of that information, it's hard to tell somebody, hey, you didn't do this correctly. But to avoid criminal negligence, I mean, start with locking guns up. I mean, that's what the prosecution in Barrow County is going to tell you from here on out is gun safety is everybody's concern, not just particular people or the police.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we talk about the devastation this has caused Barrow County and how powerful this prosecutorial case was. I mean, we're talking about taking the better half of the 2 weeks that we saw of trial, of just the prosecution laying out emotional testimony from the victims, laying out evidence, photos, text messages within the Gray family. You, sir, spent an extensive amount of time as a prosecutor yourself. So your reaction, what was the most compelling for this jury in terms of what was put in front of them?
Well, I'm sure you and your viewers probably know only a jury can tell you what they found to be the most credible evidence. But
first,
I apologize. We had some technical issues there.
That's okay.
I'll rephrase the question. You know, the prosecutor's job is to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone is guilty. And in this case, it seems that they succeeded quite well in this endeavor. And the level of evidence and testimony that was presented to this jury, is there any in particular that feels the most substantial?
So, as a defense attorney, if I was crafting this case, I would try and approach it from what we refer to as parties to a crime. That's the burden that the state's going to have to overcome to show that Colin was just as responsible as Colt was for all of these deaths. And what parties to a crime does basically is it says, okay, you were involved in this in some manner, so you're just as responsible as Colt was. Well, there's a little added part to this because Colin is Colt's father, and he bought the firearm. I think when you start adding things up across the board, when you're looking at everything, there's enough there that it's just a huge burden that this defense has to come up against trying to show that Colin wasn't involved. Now, I don't know every single piece of information that the defense had, but trying to manage all of that along with the ease that the prosecution really had with this case, and I don't mean ease, nothing was easy about any of this, but the volume of evidence that they had was just overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. And hard to watch at times, too. For the defense, their main argument that they tried to present was that there were signs that were missed, by the school, by other family members, even by law enforcement that had come to the house before. And they were trying to communicate that it can't all lie with Colin. Now, obviously, the jury sided with the prosecution, but that defense of painting Colin Gray as an overwhelmed father, was there ever a chance that the jury was going to see that above his involvement in Colt Gray's, in catching these signs for more than 3 years?
Well, okay, so the overwhelmed father defense is not, I would say that it's not going to work the way that the defense planned or plans, simply because of the amount of evidence that they had. There's the question that you just asked me, there's actually a bunch of information that I can give you on that, because while I agree that the evidence is voluminous, we have another issue in that anytime, in the criminal work that I do, anytime that the court has an issue with, not the court, I apologize, that the school has an issue with a child, they usually report that to either law enforcement or DFACS or the courts themselves, especially when it's outside the scope of what the school can handle. So here in particular, you've got mental health issues, you've got a lot of truancy issues, you've got things that the school should have caught on to, or what you, as you said earlier, are red flags that there's an issue with this student. And had that been done, maybe it would have been caught. Maybe something else would have happened. I mean, there's a whole bunch of maybe. You can have conjecture for forever about all of that. But simply put, I mean, the overwhelmed father thing, that's going to be a burden that the defense is going to have a hard time with unless they had some evidence that we didn't see.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking with Michael Barber, a criminal defense attorney, not connected to the Colin Gray trial, but joining us as a legal expert and to weigh in. We have yet to see Colt Gray see his day in court. How does what happened here, what we saw, the conviction of Colin Gray, the evidence presented, how is that going to affect his son now?
Well, they can't use, we have something called the confrontation clause. So they're not going to be able to use the father's testimony without having him testify. And that's just going to be difficult to get in without having him actually sit down and testify, because it would violate the confrontation clause. But anybody else that testified that would be willing to come in and testify would be able to do it. I've always paraphrased it as you can't cross-examine a piece of paper, and that would definitely be the case here.
Yeah, certainly. Final question for you, sir, was thoughts, takeaways. I mean, we saw a powerful 2-week trial of Colin Gray leading to this conviction and possibly a sentencing of up to 180 years in prison. Now, we were told by the district attorney that that sentencing was forthcoming. They did not issue a date or time. But for those watching this, really around the nation, what do you want people to take away?
I think that what Barrow was trying to emphasize is gun safety, and that you can no longer hide behind, well, I wasn't paying attention to what my child was doing. I don't think that's going to work anymore.
And we will continue to watch what comes out of the conviction and now upcoming sentencing of Colin Gray. We will continue to monitor for any developments in the Colt Gray case. And of course, you can count on us on ANF Plus to bring you gavel to gavel coverage and legal analysis.
Thank you for watching ANF Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.